Hey everybody, Dr. Miller back with you again. I'm still one half of the Complete Sentence Super Team for English 321 this semester. Dr. Melanson and I have prepared this set of 4 short introductory videos to give you a quick way to reference some of the key concepts that we're going to keep coming back to in this class. Now, in the first video, we talked about those 8 parts of speech, those 8 terms that we can use to understand how words are working in a sentence. In the second video, Dr. Melanson talked about how words can slip and slide among those categories depending on how they function in the sentence. That is, depending on how they relate to one another in the sentence. I'm going to build on that idea of how words relate to each other in this video and show you how when we begin to put words together, we actually begin to construct sentences. And all of the sentences that we construct in English can be categorized into one of only 4 categories. And if we can get our heads wrapped around those 4 categories, we're going to be a long way down the road to understanding how English grammar works and ultimately even English punctuation. But remember, our point here is not to make you the grammar police. Our point here is to show you how the language works so you can make the language work for you. So let's get started. When we think about this, we often think about words having meaning. But in fact, words don't mean anything unless they are in relationship to other words. Our whole language depends upon the relationship of words to other words. When we begin to assemble words together into groups that convey meaning, we have basically 2 groups of words that function in our grammar. One group we're going to call phrases. The other group we're going to call clauses. And the difference between these 2 groups is that clauses are going to be the groups of words that we build around subject-verb relationships. Now, I said in video number 1 that verbs are the most important part of our grammar, and that still holds true in this video. So when we think about clauses, clauses are the subject-verb relationship. Subjects are nouns, they are our actors. Verbs are the action words. So clauses contain subjects and verbs. Phrases, on the other hand, are groups of words that convey meaning, like out the window, but that they don't contain any subject-verb group at all. Now, that's going to become important because we're going to be talking about phrases and clauses all the way through this particular class. And in fact, when we think about constructing sentences, we have to think particularly about clauses. So let's talk a little bit more about how clauses actually govern the kinds of sentences that we have. The most basic kind of relationship I can have is a single subject-verb relationship. We call this a simple sentence because it's the simplest kind of relationship that I can have. You can see on the screen, I went to college, studied hard, and got my degree. I've actually got 3 verbs in that sentence. I went, studied, and got. But I've only got 1 subject. So we say we have 1 subject-verb relationship. I have 1 subject. In this case, I've got 3 verbs, but it's 1 subject-verb relationship. That's all I've got in the sentence. That's a simple sentence. Those words highlighted in yellow on the screen, those are phrases. They don't affect the kind of sentence at all. But I wanted to show you that they do convey some meaning to the sentence. They just don't contain the subject-verb group. If we think about sentences that are a little more involved, then we could think about putting 2 or more subject-verb relationships together in a single sentence. I went to college and I studied hard. Notice, by the way, that this subject-verb relationship is different from the one that we looked at just a second ago. In this case, I have 2 subject-verb relationships. I went, I studied. If I had said I went and studied, that would just be 1 subject-verb relationship. But by repeating the subject, I've actually changed the kind of sentence because I've created another subject-verb group. I went to college and I studied hard. Again, the words highlighted in yellow are a phrase. They're important, right? But they don't govern the kind of sentence that I have. Now, the other thing you can see on this sentence is some common punctuation ways to handle this sentence. We'll cover those in more detail when we get to this part of the course. The third kind of sentence that I can again have two subject-verb relationships, but instead of putting them together as equals, I can actually take one of those subject-verb relationships and make it dependent, make it less important in my sentence. After I graduated, I went to college and studied hard for 4 years. Notice that I have two subject-verb groups. I graduated, I went and studied. That's just two subject-verb groups because I have two subjects, two verb groups attached to the subjects, right? But that the first subject-verb group, after I graduated, is actually dependent on the second subject-verb group, I went to college and studied hard. It's dependent, by the way, because of a dependent marker. I've highlighted it in red on your screen. We'll talk more about these subordinating conjunctions when we get to this point in the course. But for right now, the most important part of this sentence is the independent clause. I went to college and studied hard for 4 years. There's just one of those. It's connected to a dependent clause. By the way, I can have any number of dependent clauses here, but if I have one independent clause and a dependent clause, I've got a complex sentence on my hands. The fourth kind of sentence is a kind of hybrid model. Now I've got two or more independent clauses. I've got at least one dependent clause, and that creates a compound complex sentence. I went to college after I graduated, and I majored in English. I went and I majored are my two independent clauses. They're the most important part of my sentence. After I graduated is my dependent clause because it has the dependent marker, again highlighted in red. And again, I've highlighted to college and in English in yellow just to remind you that there are phrases in our sentence as well. They don't determine the kind of sentence, but they will become important when we think about how we're going to graphically show these relationships in diagrams. So if we think about these four kinds of sentences, a simple sentence has one independent subject-verb group and any number of phrases. A compound sentence has at least two independent subject-verb groups. It can have more, by the way. It can have 40 independent subject-verb groups. It's still going to be a compound sentence. And it can have any number of phrases. A complex sentence has one independent subject-verb group plus one or more dependent subject-verb groups and any number of phrases. And a compound complex sentence has at least two independent subject-verb groups plus one or more dependent subject-verb groups, and again, any number of phrases. Now, all of the sentences that you're ever going to write in English, all of the sentences that you ever have written in English, more importantly, all of the sentences that have ever been written in English can be put into one of these four categories. And if we can understand what category the sentence fits in, that's going to affect how we punctuate it, but it's also going to affect how we understand and interpret the sentence. And by the way, it's also going to affect our style. Because as writers, each of us favor one or more of these sentence structures, and we tend to use the same sentence structures over and over and over again. And even more interesting is that the kind of sentence structure that we favor tends to reveal a little bit about how we think about concepts and how we think about the world. We'll talk more about that when we get to that part of the course, but Dr. Melancon is now going to talk a little bit about how we can graphically understand those relationships of the sentences.